Hello, dear students and friends. Today, I will discuss one of the most important essays written by the great African writer Chinua Achebe. The name of the essay is Colonialist Criticism. This will be an explanation with certain relevant points of the essay. I will just try to explain it briefly. So let me just go through the essay. First of all, I would just like to mention a few novels, standout novels of Achebe. In fact, he is known as the writer of the novel called Things Fall Apart, which remains his magnum opus, or the most important work. Then followed by certain other novels like No Longer at Ease, Arrow of God, A Man of the People, Anthills of Savannah. And apart from that, one of his standout lectures, actually the most significant lecture, is Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So this is a brief profile of his achievements as a writer. So now, to understand the essay, we have to basically assimilate an idea about colonialism and post-colonialism. All right, so this is basically about the colonialist criticism. So what we got to understand is what is colonialism and what is post-colonialism. All right, so in a nutshell, with certain relevant points, I'm just trying to just sort out the difference between these two. That is colonialism and post-colonialism. Colonialism implies the dominance of a strong nation over a weaker nation. So it means actually when a strong nation tries to control over a weak nation. All right, that leads to colonialism. So instances are England actually trying to get control. England when Englishmen actually, they controlled a country like India. All right, so that was that colonialist force, or they were the representatives of colonialism. So in places like Africa, okay, also that colonialism flourished during that period of time. So this is something actually, this is done by means of brute force. This is done through force and atrocities towards the natives. So these colonial powers actually, they use force as well as different atrocities, different forms of conducts which are atrocious, which are very forceful, which are sometimes even immoral, inhuman, all right, towards the natives or towards the real or indigenous people of these countries. The colonizers convinced themselves that they stand on high moral grounds as their attempt is to reform the colonized people. So the colonizers feel, they convince themselves that they are standing on high moral grounds because they are trying to reform the colonized people. They are trying to reform the natives. They in fact feel that the natives are uncivilized people, savages who need reformation. And just because they are trying to reform these people, reform them, so they stand on high moral grounds. They in fact feel that it is their responsibility to reform these people. That's why they think, or they tell themselves, they rather feel that they have the license to do whatever they want, like forcing them, even treating them with different atrocious means as well. So these colonizers have that sort of a thinking going, all right, while trying to control these colonized people, all right, the natives of these countries. Then, however, after the colonial era actually ended, or the effect of colonialism subsided, all right, there was a reaction to that colonialism. Every action has reaction. Okay, so even colonialism had its reaction in post-colonialism. These are practitioners of this post-colonialism concept. They actually attempt Post-colonialism attempts to expose the falsity and validity of colonial assumptions. They try to expose, they try to unveil, they try to just reveal that these colonial assumptions or these colonial colonial convictions are not true, are not actually valid. These colonial powers they don't have relevant grounds to force the natives to use brute force over the natives. In fact, they are not they don't stand on moral grounds, all right, to control these people or the natives of these countries. They cannot control these people by atrocious means. They assert, that is the post-colonialism, in fact, the practitioners of post-colonialism, they assert, they emphasize that no culture is better or worse than other cultures. While colonialist forces or colonialism tries to get control over the culture and the tradition or the way of life of the natives or the indigenous people, post-colonialists they believe that no culture is better or worse, which is completely in contrast to the colonial perspective. All right, so this is something that we need to take into consideration before just going into the essay. All right, so the most relevant points of the essay are, the first of all, colonialist criticism of Achebe strongly criticizes the failure of Europe to understand the African literature on its own terms. Here in the essay Colonialist Criticism, Achebe strongly criticizes the failure of Europe. He has criticized the European perspective. In fact, he has criticized Europe because it has failed, according to him, Europe has failed to understand African literature properly in its own terms. They have failed to understand the real significance of African literature. All right. Then secondly, he says, here Achebe unveils the sense of superiority found in colonialist criticism and analyzes African literature on its own terms. And again, Achebe here reveals that Europe, the Western countries, they have a superiority complex. In fact, the colonial powers, they feel that they are superior to the African people. All right. And they analyze African literature from their perspective. Okay, if it is African literature or the elements of African literature is not to their liking, all right, they are biased, they are prejudiced against African literature. In fact, they think that African literature is inferior to them or their literature. All right, Achebe discards the concept of universalism as a mere attempt to write like a Western author. So the Western authors, Western people, Western critics, they feel that universalism is not there. Universalism or universality, the concept of universality is missing in African literature. But Achebe discards or rejects that concept of universalism because he thinks that the Western concept of universalism is only an attempt to write like a Western author. Westerners or Europeans want the Africans to write like a Western author. Okay, so if they don't do that, they are not called universal. Then the next point is that the author believes that every literature should try to represent things that belong to its people and must relate to a particular place. So the author thinks that every literature, any writer, irrespective of the place that he belongs to, he has to represent the things or the people. He has to represent his own people, native things. And every literature must relate to a particular place. It must be related or associated with a particular place. All right. So, and again he says in the next point, instead of universalism, he stands for localization. All right. Then Achebe says that He discards the concept of universalism, merely calling it a Western concept. Okay. And in fact, he supports or he stands for localization. That is actually, he says that any writer actually, he should relate to his own place. His writing should be associated with his native people, native things, native culture, native civilization, native tradition, and the native sensibility. All right. Achebe criticizes African and British critics, all right, for ignoring the particularity of the African experience and praising universality. Achebe criticizes British critics as well as African critics because they have neglected, they have ignored the particularity, the speciality of the African experience. And just because they are just talking about universality again and again, he doesn't actually support them. Because the concept of universality to Achebe is completely Western. The Western or the European countries have just created the concept of universality according to their own whims and fancies. In fact, the concept of universality is completely biased or prejudiced as far as he is concerned. Then he says, he mentions critics like Honor Tracy, a British critic, then Iris Andreski, Charles Larson, Philip Allen for their claim of lack of universality in African literature. So here in his essay, during his essay, he has mentioned different critics like Honor Tracy, all right, who took to that Achebe's first novel, Things Fall Apart. In fact, criticized that novel a lot, all right. And a lot of other critics actually. In fact, they are claiming, just because of their claim that African literature does not have universality. In fact, he has criticized these critics like Tracy Andreski and Charles Larson and Philip Allen, just because they are claiming repeatedly that African literature does not have universality. Because Achebe feels that African literature represents the African way of life. And every literature, every writer, every author, he is within his rights to represent his own people, tradition, culture, and his own sensibility. All right. And finally, he convincingly nullifies, Achebe tries to nullify, in fact, he convincingly nullifies their biasness and prejudice and asserts the significance of localization in literature. So whatever he says, Achebe says, actually, it seems really justified, right? Just because he thinks or he feels that Europe is biased or prejudiced against African literature, simply because they are colonial powers and they just treat everything from the colonial perspective, and he rejects that colonial perspective and their concept of universality, and instead he stands for localization. That is the representation of African way of life in literature. All right, this is the essay point wise. In brief, I have just tried to jot down in different points, so I hope you have understood my explanations. Until the next time, goodbye. Thank you.